didn't look however old he was, and he didn't look like the local men with too much gravy over biscuits in the morning. During the last shopping trip to Des Moines, she had bought new perfume, Windsong, and she used it now sparingly. What to put on? It didn't seem right for her to dress up too much, since he was still in his working clothes. Long-sleeved white shirt, sleeves rolled down to just below the elbows, a clean pair of jeans, sandals. The gold hoop earrings Richard said made her look like a hussy, and a gold bracelet. Hair pulled back with a clip, hanging down her back. That felt right. When she came into the kitchen, he was sitting there with his knapsacks and cooler, wearing a clean khaki shirt with the orange suspenders running over it. On the table were 3 cameras and 5 lenses, and a fresh package of Camels. The cameras all said Nikon on them. So did the black lenses. Short ones and middling ones, and a longer one. The equipment was scratched, dented in places, but he handled it carefully, yet casually, wiping and brushing and blowing. He looked up at her, serious face again. Shy face. "I have some beer in the cooler. Like one?" "Yes, that would be nice." He took out 2 bottles of Budweiser. When he lifted the lid, she could see clear plastic boxes with film stacked like cordwood in them. There were 4 more bottles of beer besides the 2 he removed. Francesca slid open a drawer to look for an opener, but he said, "I've got it." He took the Swiss Army knife from its case on his belt and flicked out the bottle opener on it, using it expertly. He handed her a bottle and raised his in a half salute. To covered bridges in the late afternoon, or, better yet, on warm, red mornings, he grinned. Francesca said nothing but smiled softly and raised her bottle a little, hesitantly, awkwardly. A strange stranger, flowers, perfume, beer, and a toast on a hot Monday in late summer. It was almost more than she could deal with. There was somebody a long time ago who was thirsty on an August afternoon. Whoever it was studied their thirst, rigged up some stuff, and invented beer. That's where it came from, and a problem was solved. He was working on a camera, almost talking to it as he tightened a screw on its top with a jeweler's screwdriver. "I'm going out to the garden for a minute. I'll be right back." He looked up. "Need help?" She shook her head and walked past him, feeling his eyes on her hips, wondering if he watched her all the way across the porch, guessing that he did. She was right. He watched her, shook his head and looked again, watched her body, thought of the intelligence he knew she possessed, wondered about the other things he sensed in her. He was drawn to her, fighting it back. The garden was in shade now. Francesca moved through it with a dishpan, done in cracked white enamel. She gathered carrots and parsley, some parsnips, and onions and turnips. When she entered the kitchen, Robert Kincaid was repacking the knapsacks, neatly and precisely, she noticed. Everything obviously had its place, and always was placed in its place. He had finished his beer and opened 2 more, even though she was not quite done with hers. She tilted back her head and finished the first one, handing him the empty bottle. "Can I do something?" he asked. "You can bring the watermelon in from the porch, and a few potatoes from the bucket out there." He moved so easily that she was amazed at how quickly he went to the porch and returned, melon under his arm, 4 potatoes in his hands. "Enough?" She nodded, thinking how ghost-like he seemed. He set them on the counter beside the sink where she was cleaning the garden vegetables, and returned to his chair, lighting a Camel as he sat down. "How long will you be here?" she asked, looking down at the vegetables she was working on. "I'm not sure. This is a slow time for me, and my deadline for the bridge pictures is still 3 weeks away. As long as it takes to get it right, I guess. Probably about a week." "Where are you staying? In town?" Yes, a little place with cabins. Something or other motor court. I just checked in this morning. Haven't even unloaded my gear yet. That's the only place to stay, except for Mrs. Carlson's. She takes in roomers. The restaurant will be disappointed, though, particularly for someone with your eating habits. I know, it's an old story, but I've learned to make do. This time of year it's not so bad. I can find fresh produce in the stores, and it stands along the road. Bread and a few other things, and I make it work, approximately. It's nice to be invited out like this, though. I appreciate it. She reached along the counter and flipped on a small radio, one with only 2 dials, and tan cloth covering the speakers. With time in my pocket and money on my... and what... With time in my pocket and the weather on my side, a voice sang. Guitars chunking along underneath. She kept the volume low. I'm pretty good at chopping vegetables, he offered. Okay, there's the cutting board. A knife's in the drawer right below it. I'm going to fix stew, so kind of cube the vegetables. He stood 2 feet from her, looking down, cutting and chopping the carrots and turnips, parsnips and onions. Francesca peeled potatoes into the sink, aware of being so close to a strange man. She had never thought of peeling potatoes as having little slanting feelings connected with it. You play the guitar? I saw the case in your truck. A little bit. It helps keep me company. Not too much more than that. My wife was an early folkie, way before the music became popular, and she got me going on it. Francesca stiffened slightly at the word wife. Why, she didn't know. He had a right to be married, but somehow it didn't fit him. She didn't want him to be married. She couldn't stand the long shoots when I'd be gone for months. I don't blame her. She pulled out 9 years ago, divorced me a year later. We never had children, so it wasn't complicated. Took one guitar, left the El Cheapo for me. You hear from her? No, never. That was all he said. Francesca didn't push it, but she felt better, selfishly, and wondered again why she should care one way or the other. I've been to Italy twice, he said. Where are you from originally? Naples. Never made it there. I was in the north once, doing some shooting along the River Po, then again for a piece on Sicily. Francesca peeled potatoes, thinking of Italy for a moment, conscious of Robert Kincaid beside her. Clouds had moved up in the west, splitting the sun into rays, and splayed in several directions. She looked out the window above the sink and said, He looked up out the window above the sink and said, God light. Calendar companies love it. So do religious magazines. Your work sounds interesting, Francesca said. She felt the need to keep neutral conversation going. It is. I like it a lot. I like the road and I like making pictures. She noticed he'd said making pictures. You make pictures, not take them? Yes, at least that's how I think of it. That's the difference between Sunday snap shooters and someone who does it for a living. When I'm finished with that bridge we saw today, it won't look quite like you expect. I'll have made it into something of my own, by lens choice or camera angle, or general composition, and most likely by some combination of all of those. I don't just take things as given. I try to make them into something that reflects my personal consciousness, my spirit. I try to find the poetry in the image. The magazine has its own style and demands, and I don't always agree with the editor's taste. In fact, most of the time I don't, and that bothers them, even though they decide what goes in and what gets left out. I guess they know their readership, but I wish they'd take a few more chances now and then. I tell them that, and it bothers them. That's the problem in earning a living through an art form. You're always dealing with markets, and markets, mass markets, are designed to suit average tastes. That's where the numbers are. That's the reality, I guess, but as I said, it can become pretty confining. They let me keep the shots they don't use, so at least I have my own private files of stuff I like. And once in a while another magazine will take one or two, or I can write an article on a place I've been and illustrate it with something a little more daring than National Geographic prefers. Sometimes I'm going to do an essay called The Virtues of Amateurism for all of those people who wish they earn their livings in the arts. The markets kill more artistic passion than anything else. In a world of safety out there, for most people, they want safety. The magazines and manufacturers give them safety, give them homogeneity, give them the familiar and comfortable. Don't challenge them. Profited subscriptions and the rest of that stuff dominate art. We're all getting lashed to the great wheel of uniformity. The marketing people are always talking about something called consumers. I have this image of a fat little man in baggy Bermuda shorts, a Hawaiian shirt, and a straw hat with beer can openers dangling from it, clutching fistfuls of dollars. Francesca laughed quietly, thinking about safety and comfort. But I'm not complaining too much. Like I said, the traveling is good, and I like fooling with the cameras and being out of doors. The reality is not exactly what the song started out to be, but it's not a bad song. Francesca supposed that, for Robert Kincaid, this was everyday talk. For her, it was the stuff of literature. People in Madison County didn't talk this way about these things. The talk was about weather and farm prices and new babies and funerals and government programs and athletic teams, not about art and dreams, not about realities that kept the music silent, the dreams in a box. He finished chopping vegetables. Anything else I can do? She shook her head. No, it's about under control. He sat at the table again, smoking, taking a drink of beer now and then. She cooked, sipping on her beer between tasks. She could feel the alcohol, even this small amount of it. On New Year's Eve at the Legion Hall, she and Richard would have some drinks. Other than that, not much, and there seldom was liquor in the house, except for a bottle of brandy she had bought once, in some vague spasm of hope for romance in their country lives. The bottle was still unopened. Okay, sorry about that. Vegetable oil. 1.5 cups of vegetables. Cook until light brown. Add flour and mix well. Add water, a pint of it. Add remaining vegetables and seasonings. Cook slowly, about 40 minutes. With the cooking underway, Francesca sat across from him once again. Modest intimacy descended upon the kitchen. It came somehow from the cooking. Fixing supper for a stranger, with him chopping turnips and, therefore, distance, beside you, removed some of the strangeness, and with the loss of strangeness there was space for intimacy. He pushed the cigarettes toward her, the lighter on top of the package. She shook one out, fumbled with the lighter, felt clumsy. It wouldn't catch. She smiled a little. He smiled a little. Carefully took the lighter from her hand and flipped the flint wheel twice before it caught. He held it. She lit her cigarette. Around men she usually felt graceful in comparison to them. Not around Robert Kincaid, though. A white sun had turned big red and lay just over the cornfields. Through the kitchen window she could see a hawk riding the early evening updrafts. The 7 o'clock news and market summary were on the radio, and Francesca looked across the yellow formica toward Robert Kincaid, who had come a long way to her kitchen, a long way across more than miles. It already smells good, he said, pointing toward the stove. It smells quiet. He looked at her. Quiet? Could something smell quiet? She was thinking about the phrase, asking herself. He was right. After the pork chops and steaks and roasts she cooked for the family, this was quiet cooking. No violence involved anywhere down the food chain, except maybe for pulling up the vegetables. The stew cooked quietly and smelled quiet. It was quiet here in the kitchen. If you don't mind, tell me a little about your life in Italy. He was stretched out on the chair, his right leg crossed over his left at the ankles. Silence bothered her around him, so she talked. Told him about her growing years, the private school, the nuns, her parents, housewife, bank manager, about standing along the sea wall as a teenager and watching ships from all over the world, about the American soldiers that came later, about meeting Richard in a cafe where she and some girlfriends were drinking coffee. The war had disrupted lives, and they wondered if they would ever get married. She was silent about Niccolo. He listened, saying nothing, nodding and understanding occasionally. When she finally paused, he said, "And you have children, did you say?" "Yes. Michael is 17. Caroline is 16. They both go to school in Winterset. They're in 4-H. That's why they're in Illinois State Fair, showing Caroline's steer. Something I've never been able to adapt to understand, is how they can lavish such love and care on the animals, and then see them sold for slaughter. I don't dare say anything about it, though. Richard and his friends would be down on me in a flash. But there's some kind of cold, unfeeling contradiction in that business." She felt guiltily mentioning Richard's name. She hadn't done anything at all, yet she could feel guilt, the guilt born of distant possibilities. And she wondered how to manage the end of the evening, and if she had gotten herself into something she couldn't handle. Maybe Robert Kincaid would just leave. He seemed pretty quiet, nice enough, even a little bashful. As they talked on, the evening turned blue, light fog brushing the meadow grass. He opened 2 more beers for them while Francesca's stew cooked quietly. She rose and dropped dumplings into boiling water, turned and leaned against the sink, feeling warm toward Robert Kincaid from Bellingham, Washington, hoping he wouldn't leave too early. He ate 2 helpings of the stew with quiet, good manners, and told her twice how fine it was. The watermelon was perfect, the beer was cold, the evening was blue. Francesca Johnson was 45 years old, and Hank Snow sang a train song on KMA, Shenandoah, Iowa.